of Houston, and she is part of the US section of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And she, as we will learn a little more later, is one of the faculty for the UN practicum with WILPF. Also, I wanted to thank the students that helped get the word out about this event. Those of you who were on the student committee, can you just raise your hand so we know who is here? Okay, great. And then also, if you look on the back of the program, you'll see all the USF departments that helped put this event on and get the word out. And I wanted to also make note that Dr. Daly and Dr. Vamos are here from the Center for Transdisciplinary Research and Women's Health, and they're professors at the College of Public Health. They're our professors, so I just wanted to make note, and they helped us as well to get this started. So actually, it was a class that I had taken with Dr. Vamos and Dr. Calvo in a couple summers ago, and it was a class that focuses on the international perspective of women's health. And so it's actually an online course, but we go to Panama for a week and learn about different aspects of women's health from a really broad perspective. So it includes the issues of human rights and how that affects women's health. And so I actually have one of the other students who helped put this event on, Jessica Gibson. She's the former president and now secretary, research and education coordinator for the Maternal and Child Health Student Organization. She's going to talk a little bit more about that class and how it connects to this presentation.
Thank you. I just want to give a really big thanks and congratulations to Christina. She's been wonderful in spearheading this event, and she really had a vision, and she's definitely made it come to life with the collaborations that she's been able to create through all of the student organizations and departments across the campus. One major reason I was so eager to assist Christina in organizing this panel is, as she mentioned, she and I were able to take a course on international women's health. And the course offered the opportunity to travel to Panama, in addition to just a beautiful coursework that we really opened our eyes to a lot of, excuse me, I need to take a breath for a moment. The course offered the opportunity to travel to Panama and gave us the opportunity to see for ourselves what women in other countries face. It really opened my eyes to what goes on outside of the U.S. and the realities that women living in developing countries face on a daily basis. What is especially great about this course is the strengths-based approach in combination with a humanitarian perspective. We were able to see a broad spectrum of issues, including violence, aging, economics, and policy, and how each of these issues are intertwined and the role the issues play in the quality of women's health. In addition to the Panama trip, I was able to travel to India this summer, and this was an amazing opportunity, as I realized not everyone is able to travel outside of the U.S. and see for themselves what's really going on. So bringing women in from other countries who are at the higher policy positions to spread awareness and give light to what is happening in the world, especially related to women's health, is important to me to share with the university and the community. I wanted to share a recent event that occurred. A young girl that I had the opportunity to meet in India unfortunately passed away a few days ago. And in a moment, I'm going to ask everyone to take a brief moment and really reflect on what brought each of you here today. I had the pleasure of meeting this young girl, Keisha, and bonding with her. She was only 17, and the news has really been very devastating for me. Unfortunate and tragic situations like this take place every day all across the world, and many young girls and women are lost from this world too soon. So I want to ask you to take a moment of silence and really reflect on the families and the role that you play in across the world.
Thank you, Jessica. So I took that course as well, and one of the things that that course did for me was actually broaden my view of women's health and encouraged me to look more at the international level of the policies that are in place and the other international agreements that have taken place over the decades. And so when I saw in one of our emails that we all get an opportunity to apply to this UN practicum, I jumped on that, especially after that summer course. And so the UN practicum last year was in conjunction with the 58th session of the Commission on the Status of Women meeting, which last year focused on the post-2015 development agenda. However, this year it's on the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. So just to back up a little bit, the Commission on the Status of Women was created in the first year that the United Nations had their first General Assembly in 1946. And so each year since then, the CSW has been mandated to report and establish recommendations to promote women's rights among all different sectors. And so one thing I actually didn't do before, but I was interested, is to hear kind of the different sectors that you all represent. I know that we have some public health students here. If you want to just raise your hand. Okay. And we have some anthropology as well. And possibly some students from women and gender studies. Okay. And how about sociology? Social work? And then government and international affairs? Okay. And actually all of those departments at USF help support this event and get the word out to all of you. So again, thank you for those departments. So since the beginning, the Commission on the Status of Women has always had close ties with NGOs and civil society groups. In fact, when you go to the CSW now, there's hundreds of side events and parallel events that NGOs host to share the work that they're doing, to network with other organizations, and to also contribute to the dialogue and creation of the recommendations that are developed from the CSW. So when I went as a WILPF student delegate, we attended meetings at all levels, and we were able to see how WILPF advocates for disarmament, the representation of women in the peace building process, and the human rights of women. It is from WILPF's global network, from the local level, which we'll see today, to the highest decision-making bodies at the UN, that they are able to advocate for their priorities related to women's peace and security. So as I mentioned, this year the CSW is focused on the Beijing Platform for Action. And so at this conference, or at these meetings, women from all around the world will be discussing both the challenges and achievements that we've made in the 20 years since the Platform for Action has been created. It was originally written and put into place at the 4th World Conference on Women in 1995. And it still is used as a guide for women who are doing this work on a daily basis. And that's really the point of this, is that it takes organizations like WILPF and the work that you all do to actually translate the Beijing Platform for Action into practice, into something feasible, so that we can actually meet and attain those goals. So without further ado, I would actually like to introduce the panelists. And inside your program, you'll see their biographies. However, we have with us today Leah Kaur from WILPF International. She is the Human Rights Program Associate in Geneva. And she'll tell you a little bit more about her work but also how WILPF works at a higher level with the United Nations. And then, as I mentioned, Melissa Cordes is here. She is a representative of the U.S. section of WILPF. And she is currently a PhD candidate at the University of Houston. And she was a mentor and faculty for the practice that I attended. Then Heather Wellman, who is not on, but she will be later on. She's also from the WILPF U.S. section. And it's the Centennial Coordinator for WILPF. So WILPF has been around for actually 100 years come year 2015. And then we have Laura Roscoe from WILPF US, and she is the immediate past president of the US section. And she has had many years of advocacy work related to women's rights and human rights. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing about the work that she's doing now as well. Violeta Campos, she is hopefully coming on, but we'll see. She actually is part of the Mexico section of WILPF, leader of a program that works with Indigenous women in Mexico and helps with different social services and community organizing related to that population. And then finally, Susana Navarro, and she is from Colombia, the WILPF section in Colombia. And she's a psychologist and currently works with women who have experienced sexual violence or other types of violence as a result of the internal conflict in Colombia. So we're actually going to begin with Leah. Leah, are you there?
Oh. Thank you. Yes, can you hear me?
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yes, okay, great. Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you, Christina, for organizing this online panel discussion. I think this is a great initiative, and it's also a great honor for me to be part of this panel. And I would also like to thank the University of South Florida for helping to host this discussion. And of course, many thanks to those of you who are in the room with us today. And that's great that you are there, and I hope that you are many, because I cannot see you. So I hope you can see my PowerPoint presentation there. As Christina said, I work at WILPF International Secretariat, which is based in Geneva, Switzerland, and I am the associate of the Human Rights Program. So WILPF has 3 different programs located in Geneva. There's the disarmament program, which is called Reaching Critical Will. There's also a program called Crisis Response, and which basically focuses on the response to ongoing conflicts, such as in Syria or Ukraine. And there is also the Human Rights Program, which is the program I work for. And so our role as the International Secretariat of WILPF is to coordinate and bring grassroots women's voices to the United Nations bodies here in Geneva. And for that purpose, we work with our many national sections and partners around the world, and we try to give them a voice at the international level, given that most of them are mostly active at the community and national levels. And so we work, especially the Human Rights Program, work very closely with our different national sections that I think you should be able to see on the map. And so as you can see, we have members in every continent, and we are actually getting bigger now because this map will be updated next year. We will be expanding in Africa, and we will have national sections now in Uganda, Cameroon, and Ghana. And so these sections you can see on the map are those we have at the moment. So as of today, I think we have 30 sections. With which we work on a daily basis, and we also have partners. They don't appear on the map, I think, but they are mainly located in the Middle East and North Africa region. And so this whole coordination work that the International Secretariat is doing, especially the Human Rights Program, is particularly relevant in terms of human rights, because all the United Nations human rights bodies are now based in Geneva. It was not always the case in the past. It was these mechanisms were based, some in Geneva, others in New York, but today they're all in Geneva. And so that's why it's important to have a human rights program in Geneva. And so our goal is to create a mutual connection between the community level on the one hand and the international level on the other hand. Basically, the idea is to combine the work of grassroots women with the international work of the United Nations, because we believe that both levels are equally important, but if we want to be as efficient as possible in protecting human rights everywhere in the world, then local and international actors should work together. And because for many people on the ground, the United Nations seems to be too remote to bring any concrete or efficient changes on the ground, and to do some proper work that would change the situation on the ground. But we think that this is because the information from the ground does not always get to the UN. And so what the Human Rights Program does here in Geneva is that we help our national sections to interact with the United Nations human rights bodies. We help them with their advocacy work. We bring them to the United Nations so that they have a voice at the international level and not only in their local or national communities. And by doing so, then the information actually gets to the UN. So this is like the main thing we do as the Human Rights Program. And then on the other hand, we also do some capacity building and training about the human rights bodies, so that grassroots activists know how the UN bodies work, and they are informed of the work that's being done by the UN, and then they can share this information at the local and national level, and thus make the work of the UN somehow more concrete on the ground, give like some concrete aspect of the international work that then goes to the ground. To the field. And so sharing this information for us is of the utmost importance from our point of view, because we think that by interacting with each other, then the local and international actors can actually make things change in the world. And so what we also do as the Human Rights Program is that we publish blogs and newsletters to inform the general public of United Nations decisions relating to human rights. And so one of the main things that happen at the UN in terms of human rights is the Universal Periodic Review, the UPR, and so basically it's the main United Nations human rights mechanism. And basically every UN member state is reviewed every 4 years by other member states. So that means it is a peer review of the human rights situation of each country. And during this review, states give recommendations to the country under review to improve its human rights situation. And so this UPR mechanism is great and absolutely essential in the sense that it is the first ever human rights mechanism to achieve 100% of participation by UN member states, which is quite a miracle because most of the time there's always at least 1 or 2 states who don't want to be part of a human rights mechanism or a human rights review at the UN. But it's not the case with the UPR. Every UN member state agrees to participate in this mechanism. So in that sense, it's already quite a miracle. And also, another very positive aspect of the UPR is that it's a general human rights mechanism, which means that it addresses absolutely any kind of human rights violations. As long as it's about human rights, it can be addressed during the UPR. It can be discrimination, health, torture, children, as long as it's related to human rights, then it can be discussed and addressed during the UPR. And so the way NGOs participate in this UPR mechanism is our participation is absolutely vital, even though unfortunately our participation is only indirect, because we cannot make direct recommendations to the country under review. But so what we do is that we suggest recommendations for member states to endorse during the review. So that means that we have to do some advocacy work to encourage states to endorse our recommendations. In this work, we try to explain them the situation in the country that is about to be reviewed. We explain them, basically what are the issues in a specific country at the moment, and we suggest them recommendations that would help address the situation. So basically, NGOs do all the work for states. Basically, that's why it's very important that NGOs participate. And so to do this advocacy work, we have two main options. One is to submit a shadow report with our recommendations. As I said, we first briefly explain what the issues are in terms of human rights in a specific country, and then we give recommendations. And so for these shadow reports, we try to always collaborate with the national section. So it's a collaborative work between the national section and the human rights program, because we need information that comes from the ground, that comes from people who live in the country and who've been monitoring the situation and who know what is happening in terms of human rights in a specific country. And then we, the human rights program, we help formatting the report, because it has to be under a specific format and written also in a very specific language. And so the human rights program helps with that. That's why it's a collaborative work between people from the ground, grassroots activists, and us here in Geneva. The second option we have to advocate at the UPR is, and it's actually the most important one, it's to participate in what is called the UPR pre-session. Basically, these pre-sessions are meetings with diplomats here in Geneva, where we can take the floor and suggest them recommendations. And for these pre-sessions, we always bring someone from the national section to share information, because, as I said, sections are the ones who have the information and who know what is happening on the ground. So it will have much more impact to have someone that comes from the country and who can provide very detailed and specific information on the human rights situation here, than to provide information to member states here in Geneva. And so all this advocacy work for the UPR excuse me, is precisely what we are doing at the moment about the US, because the United States will be under review in April 2015 for its UPR. And so this UPR mechanism is very, very important for our work. Is a human rights mechanism that does not require the ratification of an international convention. And you may know that the US has not ratified all the human rights conventions as of today. And so because of that, the US cannot always be reviewed by all the human rights bodies, which is why, given that the UPR does not require this ratification of a convention, then the UPR is our main tool regarding the human rights situation in the US. And so what we did so far is that we submitted a shadow report, quite short, last month, where we give recommendations on various issues of concern for WILPF, namely on labor rights, on food contamination and the right to health, on the rights of undocumented migrants, and also on the lack of ratification of international human rights conventions. So this shadow report that we submitted is a short document where we briefly explain the situation in regards to certain issues that are important to WILPF, and where we provide recommendations that would help address these issues. And so for this shadow report, we always to keep it short and straight to the point, because unfortunately we know that most people don't read long reports. So that's why we always try to stick to make it as short as possible and go straight to the point. Then in March 2015, there will be the UPR pre-session for the US. And so we hope to bring someone from WILPF US to present our recommendations. These UPR pre-sessions are not open to all NGOs, because unfortunately there is no time to give the floor to all the NGOs that would like to speak, because so many of us would like to take the floor, but it's just not possible in this very short amount of time. So there is a selection procedure. So far we're always on the panel because we are actually the only women's international organization that participates in the UPR process. So that's why these UPR pre-sessions are the utmost important for us and for our advocacy work. And so hopefully for the US, we hope that this advocacy work that we are doing on the human rights situation will be fruitful, hopefully. And in particular, we'd love to have the same success as we did last year for the UPR of Colombia, for example, because what happened basically is that last year WILPF recommended that women in Colombia be included in the main negotiation team of the current peace process. And then this recommendation was endorsed by several UN member states during the UPR of Colombia. So that was the first part of the success. And then just a few months after having been reviewed, the Colombian government decided to include 2 women in the government's delegation to the peace talks. So this was obviously really, really good, but it might not have happened if it wasn't for the UPR mechanism. So that proves that this mechanism can have a real impact on the ground. It's not only something that is happening here in Geneva, far from reality of other countries, but it actually has an impact, and it can make changes on the ground, which is why NGOs' participation is absolutely essential, because we can change things. I mean, it can be only baby steps, but it's already quite a success, I think. And so hopefully we will be as successful for the United States as we were last year for Colombia. Because also what we think is that what truly matters in the UPR process is the concrete changes that should actually follow the UPR, the review, because after the review, the country reviewed has to implement the recommendations received during the review, and this is where local and national organizations can play a crucial role, because it will be an informal process of following up, and this is something that has to be done by civil society on the ground in order to monitor the progress and the implementation of the recommendations that were given during the UPR. So that means there needs to be constant pressure from civil society organizations to ensure that the human rights situation is indeed improving, because otherwise, if there's no pressure from civil society, then the UPR mechanism wouldn't be so useful and efficient. It works because civil society is involved. And so that is something, this pressure is from civil society is something that our WILPF sections around the world are doing, and we encourage them to keep an eye on the internal human rights situation of the country and then report to us so that we can keep on working on advocating for human rights here. So that's it for me, I think. I hope it wasn't all over the place. But of course, if you have, I know that sometimes human rights mechanisms can be a bit confusing. I try to make it as clear as possible. But of course, if you have any other questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. And also, if you are interested or would like to know more about anything related to WILPF's work in human rights, please feel free to contact me. I think the email address should appear on the screen now. Yes. Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. And do any of you have any questions actually for Leah right now? We have a question and answer session at the end, but so keep thinking of questions. But if you have anything now, we're transitioning. So the second speaker is Violetta, and she still hasn't been able to join us. She's around, but I'm going to try to add her really quick. Okay. However, in the meantime, I'm not sure if that's going to work or not. However, we're lucky that Melissa actually works pretty closely with Violetta, and so she's going to be able to speak a little bit on behalf of her if she's not able to join us. Is that her? Oh, no. Oh, no, okay. And panelists, we actually just turned on a computer so you could see part of the crowd. So I think those of you who are actually right there by the computer, you're now being seen. I don't think it's going to work. Violetta, or sorry, Leah, as far as your role with the UPR, while we're just waiting, I do have a question. Are you working just only with the countries that have WILPF sections, or how do you kind of prioritize which UPR reviews you're working with?
Sorry, I didn't hear you really well. What was your question?
My question was, do you work specifically with the UPRs of the countries that have WILPF sections, or how do you prioritize which UPR reviews to work with?
Oh, no. At least for the human rights program, as I said, we only work with our national sections, or we work with partners as well, but it's something that a colleague of mine is doing. But I work with countries where WILPF has sections only. So as I said, it will only be the 30 national sections that we have, that were shown on the map earlier, I think.
Okay. Yeah, the map was shown. And then another question, just before we switch over to WILPF Mexico, when the example of WILPF Colombia that you spoke about, who else was in that process? So WILPF International was part of that dialogue and that UPR review, but who else helps with that? What other international organizations or agencies work on that with you?
Yes, of course. We are not, as I said, we are the only women's international organization, but that participates in the UPR process. But there are many other civil society organizations that also participate, mostly international organizations as well, like Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch, or international service for human rights. But when it comes to the UPR pre-session in particular, as I said, there's a selection procedure. So it's not open to all NGOs. And so what they try to do is to give a voice to mainly to local national NGOs, not so much to international NGOs. Because the way the UPR works is because we need information that comes from the ground. So this information will obviously come from national or local organizations. And so I can't give you any specific names for Colombia because I don't remember them. It was last year, but I remember that there were other women's organizations, Colombian women's organizations, that participated in the UPR process as well. And we tried to, we coordinated with them as well to make sure that we were making like different recommendations, but that we're all going to towards the same goal, which was women's participation and the protection of women's human rights. Roughly speaking.
Thank you very much. And I think that was perfect timing because Violetta's online, I think. Violetta, are you there? Okay. Well, Melissa, do you want to come up and get us started with Violetta while she's trying to get on?
Well, I hope she can share obviously the first person information. But we presented together in Detroit at the WILPF annual conference in August. So I'm going to share her part of our presentation, which talks about lengua de Mexico, which is WILP in Spanish. Vida Internacional de los Hombres de la Paz y Libertad. So WILPF Mexico started in 2011 in Puebla, Mexico. There's currently, I think, about 10, we have to have 10 members to have a section of WILPF in any country, so we have 10. Violetta works as one of the officers. The way we met was actually the Latin American, well, actually the Americas section of WILPF. The Latin American section wanted more of a Spanish presence and to talk about the issues in Latin America. So WILPF International sponsored WILPF America's regional meeting in Colombia this year. And I was the delegate for the U.S. To the Americas meeting. And Violetta was one of them from Mexico, and that's really nice. We talked a lot about the issues going on in Latin America, specifically the violence, migration issues, women's rights. And Violetta and I decided that since we share a border with Mexico and a lot of the issues are transnational, we've been working together and we proposed a project together. So this is part of that presentation. Background on WILPF Mexico. They work in a lot of development projects, impact strategies. They work mostly with indigenous and our rural communities, mostly made up of indigenous women and agricultural industries there. As far as development and what they do, what they do, they work in different sectors. A lot of the officers of WILPF Mexico and Puebla actually work with a few of the universities there, so they have an academic connection. Some of them are doing research and some of them work with different research sites and as professors. So they bring in a lot of that, including charla workshops, doing research with the women as far as community assessments, what needs to be done, what other specialists they can bring in to work with them. And then they also work with NGOs. Violetta works with an NGO there called Origen that works on women's rights. So that's one of the partners for WILPF. And they have alliances. I'm sorry, I'm thinking of languages. They have Violetta? Violeta, ¿nos escuchas?
Hola, sí, escucho un poco.
Ok, ya te lo voy a pasar, ¿ok?
Perfecto. Bueno, ¿sí me escuchan?
Sí, te escuchamos.
Ok, ¿hago yo la presentación?
Sí. A
Ok.
ver, Violeta, para mí.
Vas marcando el tiempo para que puedas hacer la traducción.
Sí, sí, está bien.
Bueno, pues buenos días a todas. Es un gusto para mí estar en este panel. Gracias por la invitación y una disculpa por la tardanza, pero tuve problemas técnicos.
Thank you for the invitation. She's really happy to be here. And sorry for the delay, but she has technological problems.
Ok, pues quisiera primero hacer una presentación de lo que hacemos en LIMPAL, México, y quisiera comentar que nuestro trabajo está enfocado básicamente a la cultura de la paz, a la construcción de la cultura de la paz, y trabajamos en 3 sectores principalmente. Trabajamos en el sector académico, en el sector social y trabajamos en redes con otras organizaciones.
So just a background on most of them, which we covered. The different work they do is focused on food constructivism and culture of peace, and they work in the academic sectors, media sectors, and social sectors.
Dentro del sector académico, nosotros realizamos foros sobre derechos humanos, derechos de las mujeres, talleres, conferencias sobre temas referentes a la problemática actual de las mujeres en México, y establecemos también alianzas con mujeres académicas para replicar dichos temas con los estudiantes, con el cuerpo estudiantil, a fin de socializar esta información.
In the academic sector, they hold workshops talking about women's rights, human rights. They also work with a lot of students in the university to kind of help out the sectors there.
Con el sector civil establecemos alianzas con organizaciones, colectivos y fundaciones a fin de formar redes de apoyo, y el trabajo crucial con este sector es visibilizar las acciones del IMPAL y promover con otras organizaciones feministas la integración de la perspectiva de género en las políticas públicas.
In the social sector, they work with different organizations and do also to help create support groups of women and teach them more about WILPF's mission and advance that mission with feminist organizations as well to do assessments of gender.
Con el sector social, es decir, el sector de base, con los grupos de base, realizamos un trabajo de intervención comunitaria en el que damos respuesta y atención a problemáticas que se viven en el ámbito nacional, regional y local. Trabajamos en el diseño de proyectos y programas que contribuyan al desarrollo de habilidades de las mujeres en comunidades marginadas. Diseñamos talleres participativos en los que potenciamos la participación de las mujeres en la construcción de su propio desarrollo.
The development projects that they work with are with ONGs on the social sector and organizing and mobilizing women in issues that are national, local, social and community issues, and mobilizing women to stand up for their rights, teach them about it, and then get them involved in community issues.
Ahora, muy bien, quisiera mencionar la importancia de las mujeres dentro del entorno social en México. Quiero mencionar algunos datos que nos sirvan de base nada más. 49% de las mujeres en México trabajan y están solas. El 90% de esas mujeres, de las mujeres que cuidan, son niñas. Y, por ejemplo, en la sociedad, ¿no? El 51% de la población en México somos mujeres. 25% de los hogares los dirige una mujer entre 35 y 45 años.
Nomás para decir que tenemos la presentación aquí con los datos. So she was sharing a few of the stats that they have. We have this slide. 49% of women work and are along the overall population. That's the 25% are women aged 24 to 35.
Y un dato muy interesante es que en teoría en México se destina entre un 8 y un 15% del Producto Interno Bruto para atender el problema de la violencia hacia las mujeres. Sin embargo, pues el problema de la violencia, el problema de los feminicidios, el problema de las desapariciones sigue ocurriendo. Nosotros tenemos la duda de qué está pasando, si realmente se está destinando ese porcentaje del Producto Interno Bruto para atender ese problema.
So this is one of the movements that have from the government against domestic violence to combat some of the stats they have as far as how many women are affected by domestic violence and some of the issues that these violence goes with.
Otro tema muy importante y fundamental es el tema de la violencia, ¿no? El 42% de las mujeres mayores de 15 años en México ha sufrido violencia, 6 de cada 10 mujeres han sido víctimas de violencia y aproximadamente 2.693 mujeres mueren al año por causas violentas.
¿Tiene el primer dato que dice, Violeta?
Perdón, no escucho.
¿El dato era el 6 de 10?
El dato de 2.693 mujeres mueren al año por causas violentas.
Y antes de eso, ¿es cada 6 de 10 mujeres?
6 de cada 10 mujeres han sido víctimas de violencia.
6 in every 10 women in Mexico have been a victim of domestic violence.
Y algunos otros problemas que nosotros podemos detectar, bueno, es la escasez de oportunidades para desarrollarse, oportunidades de empleo, oportunidades de una remuneración por lo que hacen, los bajos salarios y, entre otros, la migración.
The other issues they work with are development and getting women involved in the development of their communities and migration issues.
Los problemas como los desastres naturales, las condiciones socioeconómicas, el problema de la inseguridad, hacen que las mujeres se vuelvan cada vez más vulnerables. Las mujeres en México son uno de los sectores más vulnerables y que requieren mayor atención.
One of the other issues they work with is peace and security and economic development. Women are the most vulnerable population in the they're most vulnerable in the conditions when their role. Okay, so that was just a little bit of what WILPF Mexico is doing, and so it covered kind of a broad view of what they're working on right now and the efforts that they're working on. But since we lost Violeta, why don't we go ahead and invite Susanna to come and speak now?
Hello.
Hi, Susanna.
Hey, hello.
Hello. We can hear you,
I'm
but
here. With me?
okay. Your video is loading, but we're actually loading your video. Would you like us to play that first?
Okay, well, good morning to everyone there. Especially, I thank to all of you for taking into account the work done by WILPF in Colombia, especially in the Department of Bolívar with prevention and care for victims of violence, sexual violence in the armed conflict project that is found in the British Embassy. Could you please, Christina, show my video before I start?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and do that.
Thank you very much.
The video just ended.
Okay. It finished?
It is, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, with the last scene video, I wanted to show you the critical situation for most of the Colombian people. Tourists come to my country and they just know the beauty part of Colombia, as how we could see in the video. But the reality life for most of Colombian people, it's totally different. It's so sad for me as Colombian to know that I'm born in a rich country with amazing and smart people, but we have a really hard limitation. It is internal war and the improperly administration way of its incomes. Internal war has affected us in many direct and indirect ways. One of them is that farmers have lost their lands, proceeds, earnings, and family. They have had to move away to big cities to save them life. We have many that any ID document, their quality of life is even more difficult. A new life, but they don't have enough tools to do it. Because, for example, they have too low education, most of them just have an elementary education. If you want to have a good life in the city in Colombia, you should have any degree. But it's more difficult for women displaced for violence. Most of them are though could. Besides all of this, have also been sexually abused for any or some military. Can you imagine the psychological situation of those women? Well, the worst things of all of this is that if any of these women is Afro or indigenous, she will be discriminated for the lucky Colombian people that haven't experienced war directly. Let's to analyze the life situation of them. We have that they are poor, no education, and at least a decent one, widow, children to care, no tools to survive, victim of discrimination, victim of violence, victim of sexual violence, insufficient state support. What could she do to survive in the city? Well, some of them have to resort to sexual work, prostitution. Um, this situation generates that them children can't receive a decent care and education because don't have an adult in house. They tend to spend time out of the home, don't spend enough time studying. Practically, they are educated in the street. Where they learn inadequate ways of socialization. War consequences have made a critical situations in the country that seems to get worse every day. WILPF is doing a great job with sexual violence survivors women of the armed conflict at Departamento de Bolívar at north of Colombia. As the psychologist of the organization, I have been working with approximately 18 women survivors. All of them were displaced and sexually abused. This process is being in the company by a social worker who helped in the therapeutic process and a lawyer who provides legal advices. Our job have been different because we have tried to attend women including the differential focus, where we give the importance to the culture, race, gender, educational level, gender identity, disability status, and economic levels, among others. At the moment, we work to support the woman in the process where they are going to move on. They have been working with therapeutic groups to reduce emotionally conditions caused from multiple traumatic experiences as a result of armed conflict. As therapeutic tools in group interventions, we have used the metaphor because it works to reduce the possibility of re-victimize women during a badly structured clinical interview. It gives the possibility for women to talk about their traumatic experience. Have been reinforced with individual attention, where we apply behavioral cognitive therapy, because we think that it's important that each woman can have an intimate space where they could express their most intimate feelings and to know their thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that arise after the traumatic experience to start working on it. Most of them, after the traumatic experience, start to think that it was their fault, that her body doesn't have no value, that we use that we use behavioral cognitive therapy. Some of the most common techniques of cognitive behavioral therapy are the questioning of irrational beliefs, replacing them with alternative, gradual exposures to feared situations, social skills training, and facilitating needs more appropriate for the patient's emotions. We have a woman who start feeling them empowered, recognize themselves being active and no dependent. Women show significant progress emotionally and have been reducing post-traumatic symptoms. Women begin to envision crisis as opportunity to make fans. And I feel so happy to work in this therapeutic process because it has given to me a big and amazing experience. Not just a psychologist. The more important thing is the personal experience that I have shared with those women that are amazing survivors. Well, this is it. I want to thank you for your attention. Sorry if I commit any English grammar mistake. And I want to invite you to practice a peace culture that doesn't generate violence against the woman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susanna. Um, we there were some parts of it that cut out, but I actually understood most of what you were saying. Not the English, but just the internet connection. So we really appreciate you joining us today and sharing the work that you do. And I'm curious, actually, if you were a part of the work of WILPF Columbia when they were discussing the ECR, or were you a part of that at all as well?
Sorry, I can't understand you as well. If I were part of what?
If you were a part, or if you were a part of the process at all of WILPF Colombia's or Limpal Colombia's role in the UPR, what Leo was talking about earlier.
Sorry, I don't know if it's can you speak Spanish, please? I can hear you well, and I can understand very well.
Do you work with any of the policy or advocacy pieces of WILPF or Limpal Colombia?
I work as psychologist in the organization in WILPF in Colombia. I'm the direct therapist of those women. Did I get it?
Yes. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Susana. Next, we actually have U.S. section represented by Heather and Laura. And Heather is the Centennial Coordinator for WILPF. And so she's going to speak a little bit about that.
Hi. Am I good to go?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Hi, my name's Heather, and so I'm just here to talk to you a little bit today about the 100-year anniversary. So 100 years ago, 1,300 of WILPF's founding women came together at The Hague to protest World War I, and 2015 marks the 100-year anniversary of that. And so in order to celebrate and acknowledge the centennial, we're hosting a conference in The Hague on April 27th through the 29th of 2015. And we anticipate that hundreds, we think more than 1,000 women and other peacemakers from around the world will come together in order to set the new peace agenda for the next 100 years of peace work that needs to be done. And we acknowledge that, you know, an area that has been lacking in peace building is involving and bringing women to the peacemaking efforts, especially at higher levels. And so to that end, the theme of our 100-year anniversary is Women's Power to Stop War, Uniting a Global Movement. And the aim of that is to show that women, that we still are in a place in our world where women's voices are excluded, and that we know that only when we bring women to the table and analyze conflict and seek conflict resolution in a gender perspective and integrating women into that we can achieve like a lasting peace. So that's the international sort of thing that's going on, the conference at The Hague. And all across the United States, there are other celebrations celebrating the 100-year anniversary, including events at the Hull House and at the New York Public Library and at the Swarthmore Library and Grinnell College, and women just coming together to acknowledge the work that's been done in the past 100 years and to talk about ways that we can set the agenda and involve women in the peacemaking process in the next 100 years. So that's sort of my part, and then I'll turn it over to Laura.
All right, thank you. Laura, you're on.
Okay.
Ready to go.
Yeah. Thank you, Heather. Christina, when you were introducing this morning's conference, which I have to say is just an amazing experience what you've put together here. I'm just feeling so connected to the WILPF world in ways that I often don't here in my little part of the country. I'm in Eastham, Massachusetts, and when you were introducing the conference today and talking about the Beijing Plus 20 review, I was so moved because I remember sort of the excitement that surrounded bringing home the platform for action from Beijing. I was living in Wisconsin at the time, and had no way to go to Beijing. It was like an impossible dream. So I set about trying to make sure and make connections among all of the women from Wisconsin who were better heeled than I were, who were going, to make sure that they were in contact with each other and that we could think about what we could do in our state to make the Beijing platform come alive. Shortly after the Beijing conference, there was a big national meeting of U.S. NGOs in Iowa, and we talked about what our priorities were for the U.S. women's movement in terms of the Beijing platform for action, in terms of realizing it. And there were three priorities. The top three priorities were reduce the military budget, to release more money for positive human rights realization, both here and abroad, to figure out some sort of way to recognize, honor, and support unpaid caregiving labor in the home and in the community. And the third was to get CEDAW ratified. In 1995, it seemed like a real possibility that the U.S. would, in fact, of course, ratify CEDAW. In 1994, it was voted out favorably from the Senate House the Senate Foreign Relations Committee with strong bipartisan support. So what happened in the intervening years? As Leah pointed out, CEDAW is one of the international human rights treaties that the U.S. has not ratified and adopted as law for people inside this country. So coming away from that meeting in Iowa, where we thought that ratification was imminent, I went back to Wisconsin and had to confront what was going on there in terms of the impoverishment of women. That was the moment in history when there was a lot of demonization of something called like a welfare queen, and there was a lot of discussion about transforming the federal aid to families with dependent children program. Our governor in Wisconsin at the time was a pioneer in changing that program, in effect privatizing it. And as a result of his efforts to privatize and create more barriers to aid for women who were receiving it for themselves and their children, often as their only means of support, there was a lot of people got hurt, a lot of people died. In fact, a lot of children died. And it happened because women were receiving letters in the mail saying that if they didn't contact their social worker within a certain amount of time, that they would receive no more support. They would call their social workers and they would get a voicemail box. What they didn't realize was at the same time the social workers were being laid off, so there was no one there to take their calls. WILPF, the Milwaukee chapter, the Milwaukee branch of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, was able to figure out that this was what was happening because we set up an emergency hotline once we realized that the severity of the problem. And we were able to put the pieces together and eventually bring the displaced social workers and the displaced aid recipients together in the same space to ask them what it was that they thought would help. And out of that, we crafted a city resolution that we brought to the city and then to the county government, that they would abide by the principles and processes of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. What that would mean is that the state would accept affirmative responsibility for some economic, social, and cultural rights. About that time, I left Wisconsin. About that time, during that whole debate and that whole transformation, as the new program, the TANF program, was coming into play, the U.S., although the U.S. had come back from Beijing, the government delegation had come back really gung-ho on trying to figure out how to account for women's unpaid labor. They carried on that effort for about 2 or 3 years, having big annual meetings, and it was really, the government was really behind this. They thought it would be actually an economic good thing to do. But of course, then, when we got the new welfare legislation, that other effort fell apart. Government support for that other effort fell apart. And so in some ways, it's really with a sense of sadness that as a U.S. feminist and women's rights activist, that I'm approaching the Beijing Plus 20 review next year. One thing, though, that I'm feeling really positive about is that we can, in fact, begin to live as if CEDAW were the law of the land by implementing it within our localities where we live. The most famous example, I think, of that is San Francisco, which adopted a stronger piece of legislation than what we had introduced in Milwaukee a few years later in 1998 and 1999. And their ordinance actually created a funding stream for a Department on the Status of Women to carry out gender analyses of the city's practices in various areas, and to thereby move towards gender-aware budgeting in terms of municipal services. And that has meant a lot of changes. It's meant paid family leave for people who work for the city. It has drastically reduced the level of domestic violence in the city, and it has changed some of the public works priorities so that they do things that actually benefit caregivers, such as being more curb cuts. So if you're pushing a wheelchair or a carriage, baby carriage, you have more mobility, better walking paths, better lighted walking paths, more public transportation, because these are all things that actually do have a gender dimension when you look at who's using what. So I brought a little PowerPoint that we're using for the New Cities for CEDAW campaign, in which we are trying to bring 100 cities into full compliance with the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And I don't know if you're looking at that or not. I can't see what you're looking at. And maybe Christina or somebody can tell me?
Yeah, we do have your presentation up. So ready to go.
Oh, okay, great. All right. So this is an event. This is a project that was launched at the Commission on the Status of Women meetings last March, and it's something that spoke to me because of my history with CEDAW and my belief that human rights really do start close to home. It was launched as a joint effort between the NGO CSW group, which is the group that plans all the side events around the CSW, and the City of San Francisco, and a women's NGO called the Women's Intercultural Network. And you can see that what we're doing is we're really asking people around the country, is there discrimination in their towns? And right now there are groups working on this in Louisville, Kansas City, Denver, Seattle, Pittsburgh, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and maybe a few others I don't know about yet. We're asking people to think about and talk about what the local forms of discrimination are. And these can be really different. In Massachusetts, where I live today, we've had an Equal Rights Amendment on the books since 1982 to our state constitution, but that hasn't actually succeeded in eliminating all forms of gender discrimination because, for one thing, when they did a checklist of all the things in the state body of state law that would have to be changed to really give women equal rights, they came up with a list of about 340 changes that need to happen, and there's still about 25 that haven't. But there's also things that would never be addressed. So it's important for everybody to remember that we don't nationally have an Equal Rights Amendment, and where we do have things like Equal Rights Amendment, we don't have a clear definition of discrimination. And you see that CEDAW does. It has a clear definition of discrimination that accounts for the outcomes of institutions. So the city of San Francisco, for example, may not have intended to discriminate against women when they made all of the people who were going to pick up, who were going to work for a sanitation department, start work at 6 a.m. But it had the effect of discriminating against women because there's no daycare providers that are open at 6 a.m. So they had to look at things like that. They had to look at discrimination differently. And the rest of the slides really sort of just take us through the reality of the fact that the U.S. is very much an outlier when it comes to CEDAW ratification. We're really the only industrialized country that has not ratified CEDAW and begun to integrate it into our national law. We in general are only beginning to understand the processes of data collection and gender analyses when it comes to public policy. It's rarely carried out in the public or the private sector, although there are some private sector initiatives that are pretty exciting in New York City and again in San Francisco. People don't realize that a local area can decide to adopt human rights as their law. Probably the city of Berkeley, California, has actually gone the furthest with this in terms of establishing processes and standards that are human right compliant in an international sense. Our earlier effort in the late 1990s and early 2000s to get CEDAW resolutions, we managed to get 40 cities with resolutions, over 20 countries, 20 states and over 20 counties. But this effort now is for the more binding ordinances. We flip forward a little bit. I just want to flip forward to the slide that is effective catalyst for eliminating discrimination. Our goal here is to get a conversation, a more lively conversation about what CEDAW means going across this country. While we're doing it, we think we will have a positive impact on the people who live in the municipalities and maybe even across the country by sort of changing the expectation, changing the norm, much as we've seen sort of the shift in norm toward equal marriage, something I never thought I would see in my lifetime, but I have. And when we apply CEDAW to local municipalities, there's really 5 key things that we need to look for. One is there needs to be active support from leaders. The second one is that there needs to be, we need to make use of gender analysis to really understand discrimination. We can't wait for complaints to come forward and be adjudicated in the courts. We need to really look at what it is our practices are and how they're, what kinds of realities, what kind of lived experience they're resulting in. We need to learn how to collect relevant data and how to make data-driven decisions. We need to have a funding stream, some sort of mechanism for funding, and we're really recommending that municipalities look at a tax levy of 10 to 25 cents per woman who lives in that district per year. And they need a partnership with civil society groups, because as Leah pointed out, it's all about this dialogue and this relationship between the government and the people who live within a jurisdiction. It's all about using that dialogue to raise our expectations of how we should be able to live and then meet those expectations. So that's my little, very brief overview of what the Cities for CEDAW project is about. It is about, it's also a way of expressing my commitment to WILPF's mission, because I know that if the U.S. were to do a better job at removing discrimination against women, particularly in allowing more women to serve in our national legislature and our Congress, that we might be a better actor on the world stage. We might be less willing to go for a military solution. We might, in fact, invest more in human potential. And so that's how it ties back into WILPF's mission and into the very tangible work that my WILPF colleagues are doing in Mexico and in Colombia. So thanks for this chance to talk to you today.
Thank you so much. And I think that's, a really great, conclusion to all of this is that all of you are doing work at your local or national levels, and to see how those tie to international agreements and treaties and how civil society groups can connect to the larger picture and use that for putting pressure or making change in our communities. So thank you for all of your examples today, from the very local to the national and international levels. And that's what, when I went to the UN practicum at the Commission on the Status of Women session, that was something that really was a really great experience to have in person, because so many of these women and men leaders who are working to advance the rights of women at these various levels, it gives them an opportunity to come together and take those next steps. So Melissa is going to speak a little bit about the practicum before we leave.
So, as you heard from everything, we have a practicum for the United Nations during the Commission on the Status of Women. So, as Mia had said, WILPF is one of the only governance organizations that has this consensus for the United Nations. So, as an NGO, for those of you who aren't familiar with the United Nations work in that sense, the Economic Social Council can give an NGO consultative status, which we'll have. And when you have that, you have a certain amount of passes to the UN headquarters to go to meetings and be a part of the discussion. So what we do, and Laura is one of the founders of the practicum actually, during her presidency, what we do is we allot those passes to students who we train in our mission, in our advocacy, and on our issues to go to these meetings and be a part of that. Since we have to submit our reports as well as a consultant and as international board representatives, which I am to the WILPF International Board, whatever the students bring back and share with us is what we submit and what we use to continue with the discussion. So then we have new WILPF members that we're training in the mission and bringing in their work and their perspective into our mission. and then we're using that as well to keep our part as consultants. So we open it up to 20 students every year during the Commission on Status of Women, which is usually the second week of March, the second full week. And it's a 2-week meeting, but we only ask for 1 week. The tuition is usually about $1,500, which is the majority here in Philadelphia, and it's New York, so it's not the cheapest. And registration fees for the UN food, and a couple of receptions that we go to with other NGOs that are there. What you get from that is every day you have access to the UN. You have a temporary badge as a delegate to the Commission on the Status of Women. So you get to go to the meetings. There's high-level meetings, there's side events, and then some other events going on from NGOs across the street or a different UN building off headquarter campus. And you can go to any of those meetings that have to do with a variety of issues that either a member state or an NGO in partnership with a member state or one of the missions is working on. So whatever your interests are, you can go to those meetings and discuss it with us by the end of the day. After that, before and after, actually, you're busy all week. If you think you're just learning and working through a week, that's not how it works. Speaking of Christine, before and after the meetings, you meet with us, the faculty, and we're debriefing everything you've learned, any questions that you have, and then we're training you on those issues, advocacy, and how decisions are being made on these issues during the CSW. So if you have any questions, you can direct them to Christina and myself about applying. We haven't opened up the application process yet. It should be in the next 2 weeks. But Christine is actually going to be on our practical oversight committee. She is our student this year, and we were really impressed with her, so we asked her to be on the committee. So if you have any questions, you can let us know.
Do any of you have any questions for the panelists before we let them go for the day? Hold on 1 second, actually. I'm going to turn this around. Okay, I think you're in there now. The microphone will be here. Yeah, go ahead.
My name is Donna. I'm asking for the compensation. How does the country qualify?
Okay. Panelists, I don't know if you heard that, but the question was, what does it take for a country to start or form a section, a WILPF section? Go ahead, Laura, if you...
Okay. It takes 10 members for a country to start a section. And there's a process that you go through, and there's a kit actually on the WILPF International website at wilpfinternational.org. The only time that new sections can be admitted are at Congress, and so that will be one of the festivities next April when we have our internal WILPF Congress in Geneva. We'll be welcoming the new sections. And if you want more information about that, there are international vice presidents who have responsibilities for different parts of the world, and I could definitely connect you with the appropriate person for that, whatever country it is. Maybe Leah knows where there's some information. I think there's going to be a number of them that are new.
I'm just not sure about the whole process of like how to create a section yeah, the only thing I know is that it takes at least 10 members, and I think there's like a series of criteria that the group has to follow, but I'm not sure exactly, and I think I'm not even sure like who's in charge. I think it's the whole committee that is in charge of deciding if a group can become an official national section afterwards. But I know that there's, yeah, you will probably find information on WILPF International website. I'm just not sure exactly about the details. Sorry.
But Leah, I think we've got some sections coming in from Africa and from the Middle East.
From the
West
Middle East,
Asia.
I'm not sure because in the Middle East region we work with partners, so that's a different sort of relations that we have with them. But indeed, yes, we will have 3 new sections in Africa, in Uganda, Cameroon, and Ghana. But yeah, that's the only thing I know, to be honest. I don't have a lot of information about that. Sorry.
So there's more information on the WILPF International website as far as who that information is submitted to. But you do have to have 10 members committed to it, to the mission. You do have to have officers selected, and I believe it's president, treasurer, secretary, I believe. And then you have to have the dues, annual dues already collected. If it's an organization, because we understand not all populations can afford the dues, you get automatically a waiver for the first year, I believe, and after that you can petition to have a waiver for dues.
Is there any other questions?
My name is Anna. I'm with the College of Besides this UN practicum, are there other mechanisms by which the different chapters may be quickly or will international pull in students or next generation? Are there many different programs, or is it mainly the practicums that will do that? Just wondering all the different ways that will try to help the next generation.
Oh,
I
yes.
guess that may be a question for the general.
Yeah. Okay, so sorry about maybe we'll bring the next question up here to the mic. That question was asking about besides the practicum and for the US section, are there other ways that youth or young adults are engaged in the work of WILPF, engaging work of WILPF internationally or in different sections? So basically, how do maybe WILPF International or specific sections engage younger women in the work that WILPF is doing?
Maybe I can't want to about that. So there are other sections, which is the section is a country, and then cities would be chapters. So there are other sections that have something called WILPF, Young WILPF, where they bring in younger members and kind of mentor them through the process, get them involved in the issues. Here in the U.S., I think we are the largest section internationally, and so that would be a little more difficult. But we do have, I believe that it was just brought up to Congress to start a WILPF again here in the States. But if you get involved with your local chapters, they might have some of those programs. Also, nationally for the U.S. section, we have our issues committee. And if you're interested in one of those topics as a WILPF member, you can get involved in some of the issues committee. And so that's a national thing. If you have a local chapter, because when I first started WILPF, by the way, I started as a practicum affiliate, a participant in 2011. When I first started, we didn't have a chapter in my city, so I stayed on at large through Laura's help getting involved in and that's how she kind of brought me on. So if you don't have a local chapter, if you want to start a local chapter at your university, which is another thing we're hoping to do, if you don't have access to that, you can get involved nationally as well. And there's a list of that on our US section website.
I would just want to add that you know, young women can form a WILPF branch. And some of our strongest WILPF branches have been where an age cohort of women who are kind of going through the same thing in life form a WILPF branch, because one of the things that everyone who's active at many people who are active at the branch level say is that their relationships are so close, often very, very close. And so when I was visiting the branch in St. Louis, for example, you know, I talked to them about it, and they said, well, you know, we were all young mothers with toddlers, and we were upset. At that time, it was nuclear testing. They're quite old now, but it was from their engagement with each other that they started the branch there. And since then, of course, younger people have joined. But we have to remember that at one time, or in many cases, it was a group of young women who formed a branch where they lived, and that then becomes the enduring institution for that town. And that too takes 10 people to form a branch.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? I think that is all the questions we have for today. I want to thank all of you panelists for joining us and sharing your time and experience and knowledge with us today. And I look forward to staying connected with you all in your work. So thank you for joining us here at University of South Florida. I'm going to disconnect now. So thank you again.
Thank you, Christina.